The war America is winning and the game it is losing. There is a question nobody in Washington is asking out loud. Not because the answer is classified, but because the answer is uncomfortable. America has spent 3 months bombing Iran. Its aircraft have flown thousands of sorties. Its naval assets control significant portions of the Persian Gulf. By the conventional metrics of military engagement, the United States is performing exactly as expected from the world's most powerful military force. So why does China look like the country that is winning? To answer that, you have to understand something that most coverage of this war never explains. The conflict in Iran is not primarily about Iran. Iran is the terrain. The actual contest is about something much larger, much older, and much harder to bomb into submission. It is about who controls the financial architecture that has underwritten American dominance. For the past 50 years, that architecture has a name. Most people have heard it, but very few understand what it actually does. It is called the Petrodollar system. And understanding it is the only way to understand what is actually at stake right now. In 1974, the United States made a deal with Saudi Arabia. The terms were simple. Saudi Arabia would price its oil exclusively in American dollars. Every barrel, regardless of where it was going or where it came from, would be denominated in US currency. In exchange, America would guarantee Saudi security, military presence, weapons transfers, political support, the full weight of the American security umbrella. The consequences of that single agreement were profound. Because Saudi Arabia was the world's largest oil exporter and because other Gulf producers followed its lead, the practical effect was that any country that wanted to power its economy needed oil, and any country that needed oil needed dollars. Not because they trusted American economic management, not because they preferred American financial institutions, because the physical necessity of energy created a structural demand for American currency that operated independently of American performance. This is the mechanism that allowed the United States to run persistent trade deficits without the currency collapse that would destroy any other country doing the same. It is what permitted simultaneous expansion of military spending, social programs, and financial market development across 5 decades. The petrodollar is not one element of American power. It is the operating system on which every other element of American power runs. And for the first time since 1974, that operating system is showing error messages. Here is what the daily coverage of missile strikes and naval repositioning entirely misses. Since the war in Iran began on February 28, Iran has been allowing tankers through contested waters only when payments are settled in Chinese yuan, not dollars. Yuan. Deutsche Bank strategist Monika Sachdeva called this a potential watershed moment. The dollar's share of global reserves has already fallen to 57%, a 25-year low. Saudi Arabia did not formally renew its petrodollar commitment when the original agreement came up for review in 2024. Quietly, without announcement, without a press conference, it simply did not renew. These are not dramatic gestures. They are marginal shifts. And marginal shifts in reserve currency systems are how those systems actually end. Not through dramatic collapses. Through gradual recalculation by sovereign treasury managers who notice, one by one, that the math has changed. China noticed this math a decade ago, and it started building. The construction was systematic and patient, and almost entirely invisible to Western analysts focused on military hardware and GDP growth rates. China is the world's largest oil importer, absorbing approximately 11 million barrels per day. For the petrodollar system, that represents an enormous captive demand. 11 million barrels every day requiring dollar-denominated transactions. China spent years methodically reducing the dollar content of those transactions. The mechanism was elegant. Iran under American sanctions could not sell oil at market prices on open markets. Venezuela faced the same constraint. China offered both countries an alternative. Purchase at a discount. Payment in yuan. Settlement through Chinese financial infrastructure. Entirely outside the dollar-denominated international banking system. At peak, this arrangement represented roughly 20% of China's total oil imports being handled completely outside the dollar system. 20% of 11 million barrels per day, every single day. Then China built the institutional layer. The Shanghai International Energy Exchange launched yuan-denominated oil futures contracts in 2018. Russia's Gazprom Neft has settled all of its crude oil sales to China in yuan since 2015. As of early 2026, approximately 166 million barrels of Iranian crude sat in floating storage near Chinese ports, representing a tangible ongoing flow of oil settled entirely in Chinese currency. China also developed something called CIPS, the Cross-Border Interbank Payment System, a yuan clearing mechanism that allows international transactions to bypass the dollar-denominated SWIFT network entirely. This is not a marginal experiment. This is a parallel financial architecture under active construction. And the war in Iran, rather than dismantling it, has stress-tested it and found it more resilient than American planners anticipated. Consider what happened when the disruption hit. China held the world's largest strategic petroleum reserves as of December 2025, having added an average of 1.1 million barrels per day to its commercial inventory throughout 2025 alone, reaching nearly 1.4 billion barrels total. When Iranian supply was disrupted, those reserves absorbed the shock. Russia, already supplying 17% of Chinese crude imports, stepped in to expand volumes. And crucially, every barrel China sourced from Russia to replace Iranian crude was settled in yuan and rubles. The disruption designed to force China back into dollar dependency produced instead a confirmation that the alternative architecture was robust enough to function under stress. The tactical goal failed, and in failing, it accelerated the trend it was designed to reverse. Now look at the Gulf states, because this is where the longer-term consequences become genuinely significant. Petrodollar system depends on Gulf state cooperation. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain. These are the countries that actually move the oil markets. Their willingness to price in dollars, invest their surpluses in American financial assets, and host American military infrastructure is what makes the system function. Without them, the petrodollar is a theory, not a mechanism. The security arrangement underlying that cooperation is explicit. America protects the Gulf states from regional threats. In exchange, the Gulf states maintain the petrodollar arrangement. That is the deal. It has been the deal for 50 years. Iranian drones have reached UAE industrial zones during this conflict. Qatar's energy production facilities have been targeted. Saudi infrastructure has absorbed strikes. The war that America brought to this neighborhood has simultaneously demonstrated that American military protection, while formidable, does not provide the comprehensive security guarantee the deal requires. The Gulf states are drawing conclusions. Not loudly, not dramatically, but Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 transformation program is heavily dependent on Chinese investment and technology transfer. The UAE has become one of China's most important trading partners in the broader Middle East region. Qatar sells liquefied natural gas to China under long-term contracts that represent genuine mutual dependence. Huawei has built 5G infrastructure across Gulf cities. These are not reversible relationships. Infrastructure, once built, shapes the relationships that follow. There is a counter-argument worth taking seriously. China has explicitly stated it has no interest in assuming a military role in Gulf security architecture. America maintains 40,000 to 50,000 troops across at least 19 locations in the region. The yuan is not fully convertible, which limits its function as a global reserve currency. And Gulf states that accept yuan for Chinese purchases cannot easily refuse the petro rupee or the petro yen from other buyers. Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan together account for nearly a third of Saudi oil exports. The complexity of switching systems is real, and the dollar's liquidity advantages remain substantial. These are legitimate constraints on how fast this transition moves. What they do not address is the direction. Reserve currency transitions do not happen through formal announcements. No country schedules a press conference to declare it is abandoning the dollar. They happen through accumulated, marginal decisions by central bank governors and sovereign wealth fund managers who quietly diversify their holdings, gradually explore alternative payment systems, and slowly reduce their exposure to a currency whose geopolitical anchor is becoming less reliable. The dollar's share of global reserves stood at 71% in 2000. It is 57% today. That 14-point decline happened without a single dramatic moment. It happened through exactly this kind of quiet recalculation. And here is the irony that should give American strategists genuine pause. American action in January 2026 disrupted the Venezuelan oil arrangements that had been developing for years. The Iranian campaign began in February, targeting the largest single source of yuan-denominated oil supply. China had developed within roughly 60 days. More than 20% of China's total oil import volume, specifically the portion most successfully extracted from the dollar system, was disrupted. A journalist looks at these as two separate events. A strategist sees a coordinated sequence targeting a single strategic objective, the reconstruction of dollar dependency in Chinese energy purchasing. But the sequence produced the opposite of its intended result. China's reserves held. Russian supply expanded. The alternative payment infrastructure functioned. And China emerged from the disruption having demonstrated something more valuable than any diplomatic statement could provide. Proof of concept. Its system worked. Meanwhile, America's military inventory has been consuming precision munitions and air defense interceptors at rates its production capacity cannot quickly replace. Production of advanced interceptors is measured in years, not months. A depleted stockpile in one theater is a stockpile, unavailable for other theaters until production restores it. China is not in this conflict. China is in production. Let me be direct about what I think this means, with the explicit caveat that structural trends are not destiny and outcomes are not predetermined. The war will end. American domestic political tolerance for sustained high-intensity Middle Eastern campaigns is historically limited, and the economic consequences of prolonged conflict eventually exceed the political will to maintain it. When it ends, the structural landscape that remains will be one where the Gulf states have observed American security guarantees, tested and found incomplete, where China's alternative financial architecture has been stress-tested and found resilient, where the marginal incentive for sovereign treasury managers to maintain full dollar dependency has shifted, not dramatically, but measurably, and where the institutions and infrastructure China has been building, CIPS, the Shanghai Energy Exchange, the Yuan settlement networks, the Gulf infrastructure footprint, are more deeply embedded than they were before the first American aircraft crossed into Iranian airspace. Military victories are visible. They produce footage, headlines, and press conferences. Structural shifts are quiet. They produce annual reports from central banks and gradual adjustments in sovereign wealth fund allocations and infrastructure. Contracts signed in cities most Americans cannot locate on a map. America is very good at military victories. What it may be underestimating is the cost of winning a military contest while losing the structural game that contest was supposed to protect. The petrodollar was built over decades. It will not fall overnight, but the conditions for its gradual erosion have never been more present than they are right now. And the country that has positioned itself most carefully for that erosion is the country that has not fired a single shot in this war.